Alright folks, today's Saturday session is going to look at strategies that students can use to improve their essay writing for Leaving Cert History. So we'll just get going and straight into things. Before we get going, I'll just kind of highlight ExamRevision's website and the resources that are on offer there. So on the website, if you sign up, you'll have access to video tutorials, PowerPoint notes, H1 standard notes and self-correcting quizzes for every topic on the Leaving Cert History course. So if I click into one here, you can see videos, quizzes, PowerPoints. So each video is probably around 10 to 15 minutes in length, and it covers, I suppose, each topic on the Leaving Cert course in extensive detail. When you click in, you'll see we've self-correcting quizzes available and PowerPoints and notes there as well. So for joining today's Saturday session, there is a discount code that will get you 20% off standard and premium plans on ExamRevision's website. So that code essay writing expires this Sunday at 11:59. So if you'd like to sign up, I definitely recommend signing up with that code, as you get 20% off as well. So if we just look at a quick roadmap for what we're going to cover today. Firstly, we're going to have a detailed look at the marking scheme, and just to kind of give students an insight into what an examiner will be given and how they are supposed to, I suppose, examine your essays against. Next, we'll look at a P.E.E.L paragraph approach, and this is just, I suppose, a strategy I'll use with my students to how we should structure our paragraphs in Leaving Cert History writing. Next, we'll look at how I plan essays. So we'll break it up into two different plans, macro and micro plans. We'll go into a little bit more detail about that later on. And then finally, we're going to look at a sample answer based around Mussolini's Italy, so Italian, the characteristics of life under Italian fascism. So this is what the marking scheme will look like for an examiner. This is the front page. Obviously, this is taken from 2001, higher level history, and let's have a look at what this looks like inside. So essentially, when examiners, Leaving Cert examiners, are marking your essays or marking your final Leaving Cert exam, they're marking the essays against two different, I suppose, characteristics or features. We have cumulative mark and your overall evaluation. So as you can see, this is a snippet from the Leaving Cert marking scheme. We're going to break that down into a little bit more student-friendly language and look at what that actually means for you guys as the students. But the cumulative mark, or CM, as I'm going to refer to it from this point forward, looks for historical content that's accurate and relevant to the question asked. You're going to get 60 marks for your CM, while your overall evaluation is for the general quality of the answer in context of the set question, and you're going to get 40 marks for that. We're going to break them down in a little bit more detail. So the CM, once again, another snippet from our marking scheme, is essentially marked on a sliding scale. Now I'll explain what that means now. But essentially, each paragraph that you write for a Leaving Cert History essay can achieve a maximum of 12 marks, and it's marked on a sliding scale ranging from 0 to 12. Now this is the snippet that examiners will receive in their marking scheme. We're going to look at that in a little bit more student friendly way now, and I'm just going to highlight you towards this word analysis. Okay, so an excellent paragraph will include this word analysis. So we're going to see this pop up again and again throughout the marking scheme. And it's really important that students understand every piece of excellent work in Leaving Cert History isn't just narrative. It needs to, I suppose, contain some form of analysis. So we're going to look to do that with our P.E.E.L paragraph approach and how we structure our paragraphs. But let's just keep that word at the forefront of our mind. So the cumulative mark, or the CM sliding scale, looks something like this. So at the top we have our excellent. So an excellent paragraph will receive around 11 to 12 marks, and the characteristics of that paragraph will be that it's an outstanding piece of analysis, exposition or commentary, clearly expressed, accurate, and contains substantial information. Moving down on our sliding scale, we have a very good paragraph. You'll receive 8 to 10 marks for that. Very good information, accurately and clearly expressed. good paragraph, you're going to receive 6 to 7 marks. So it's worthwhile information, reasonably well expressed. Fair, 3 to 5 marks. Limited information, barely stated. Poor, 0 to 2. Trivial or irrelevant, grave errors throughout. So this is our CM marking scale. You can obviously see the amount of detail, and I suppose just the difference in the characteristics, even between an excellent paragraph and a good, is, I suppose, extremely different, and we have a huge gap between a good paragraph and an excellent paragraph. So the cumulative mark, let's focus in on our excellent here, and something I think a lot of students need to become aware of, that it's extremely rare to be awarded an 11 to 12 marks on a paragraph, or to be awarded an excellent descriptor for that paragraph. Like, I would say that the paragraph would almost have to portray the historical event in a new light for the examiner. Like, if we look at our characteristics of that paragraph, analysis, exposition, commentary, they're very difficult to, I suppose, portray in an exam situation when you're under a lot of time constraint and time pressure. That's extremely hard to do, and it is extremely rare that in your Leaving Cert exam you're going to receive an excellent descriptor for your paragraphs. More likely, and the most common form of paragraphs are awarded good and fair, so ranging between 3 to 7 marks, and that has to be expected considering the time constraints. You know, you have 40 minutes to write your essay, essentially give or take 5 minutes per paragraph. So these are the most common grades or descriptors that are awarded for each one. So we'll see worthwhile information, reasonably well expressed, or limited information, barely stated. This is going to tell us how many paragraphs we actually need to write in our essays to maximize the amount of marks that we receive. So we're going to put forward an approach to writing our Leaving Cert essays that we're going to call the sweet spot. And I'm going to explain that now in a little bit more detail. But we're using the marking scheme to guide how many paragraphs we're writing. And we're looking to really consider and think about the structure of our Leaving Cert essays and how we're going to structure those paragraphs to maximize the amount of marks we can receive through the marking scheme. So the OE, so when awarding the OE, examiners are evaluating the quality of your answer by taking into account the following. So we have 3 different things that examiners will take into account. Firstly, to what extent has the student shown the ability to analyze the issues involved in the question? E.g., is this more than narrative? So we see that word analyze pop up again. That's a quote taken directly from the marking scheme. So students need to be going above and beyond. It's not good enough just to provide narrative and tell the story of an event. We need to analyze the events that took place over that, and I suppose give our opinions and make links to different historians and outside reading that we would have covered over the duration of the Leaving Cert History course. Secondly, students need to, or to what extent has the student used relevant evidence to support their analysis? So we see the word analysis pop up again. It's not asking students to use evidence to support like a story. Students need to be making reference to analysis. So at this point in the marking scheme, we've seen the word analysis pop up 3 times. And then finally, to what extent has the candidate shown the ability to argue a case and to reach conclusions? E.g., have they answered the question that has been asked? So it's once again in each paragraph, and if we look at our essay with the OE, we're not looking at each paragraph, we're looking at our essay as a whole. We need to be drawing conclusions. We need to clearly state our argument against the essay title. We need to provide analysis throughout the essay, and then we need to reach a conclusion towards the end. So they're difficult skills to do. We're going to look at how we can support ourselves and how students can support their essay writing by following, I suppose, just a practical approach to doing that. So the OE looks like this in the examiner's marking scheme once again. So once again, this is marked on a sliding scale, so ranging from 0 to 40. And this is, I suppose, more of just the examiner's decision on what your OE is going to be. So it's very easy to get, I suppose, a feel for how well the essay is written, how has it reacted or responded to the essay question, and then has it provided analysis. So that's what an examiner will do on that. Let's look at this sliding scale in a bit more student-friendly way. Before we do that, can I just highlight the word analysis again? So I really hope you guys are getting to understand as Leaving Cert History students, we're not here to tell the story about the past. We're not here to provide a narrative. Good historians and good historical writing will provide analysis on events. So that's really important. And we're going to look to, I suppose, at a later point in this session, how we can support you guys in doing that. So, and that's, so sorry, the 34 to 40 bracket mark is our H1, shall we say. So our OE sliding scale will look something like this. So an excellent paragraph will get 30 to 40 marks, and the characteristics of that: excellent in its treatment of the set question, particularly if it shows detailed learning, wide reading, or extensive coverage. So that's really important there with our OE. How we're going to maximize our OE and really trying to show off to our examiner is looking to reference this wide reading, or what I'm going to call outside, or evidence of outside reading or watching. So this information has to come from a source that's not in your history book, and I'm going to show you how we do that in each paragraph. Very good, 28 to 33. Characteristics will look very good but not excellent in its treatment of the set question. Accurate and substantial history. Good, 22 to 27. Good standard of treatment of the set question without being exceptional in the information or the commentary supplied. Once again, I'm going to highlight towards the difference in the characteristics of an excellent OE and just a very good OE. So big gap between excellent and OE. So we really need to be focusing on wide reading here and analysis. Fair, 16 to 21. Fair attempt at the set question but has identifiable defects, e.g. it has incomplete coverage, irrelevant data. Weak, 10 to 15. Poor in that it fails to answer the question as set but has some merits. And then very weak would have to be, I suppose, an extremely poor attempt at a paragraph to get this, or at an essay to get this. Very poor answer, which at best offers only scraps of information. Okay, the last thing that our marking scheme outlines for the Leaving Cert examiners is what a paragraph could be, or more, I suppose, a better way to phrase this would be to what a paragraph should be. So it gives us a list of 7 different things that a paragraph could be or should be, and that's going to guide the Leaving Cert examiner into how to mark each paragraph. And I'm going to go through this in a little bit of detail here, just to highlight to you guys, you need to be planning what your paragraph's going to be about, because when we look at the marking scheme, the examiner is given a detailed list of what a paragraph could be or should be defined as. So let's look at that in a little bit more student-friendly language. So there are 7 types of paragraphs outlined in the Leaving Cert marking scheme. Firstly, a paragraph could be an introduction that gives background information. Another word for that would be historiography. Defines key terms or explains the essay's approach. So your introduction should do one of those 3 things: give background information or historiography, define key terms that are going to pop up over the essay, or explain the essay's approach. In the essay example, we'll go through my introduction in a little bit of detail here towards the end, but I follow that 3rd approach here. I explain the essay's approach in my introduction. Secondly, a paragraph could be an episode, phase, or stage in a sequence of events. So for example, it could be the March on Rome and Mussolini's rise to power. What's important to note here is this is probably the most important type of paragraph, because it tells us that we are not to talk about 2 or 3 events in one paragraph. It should be one episode, phase, stage in a sequence of events. So we can only talk about 1 per paragraph, and you'll only be marked on 1 event per paragraph. That's really important to know, because it tells us that we can't just fill out paragraphs, have extended long writing pieces of paragraphs with multiple events. We deal with 1 event, episode, phase, or stage in that paragraph. That's important. It could be an aspect of a topic or issue with supporting factual references, a point in an argument or discussion with supporting factual references, an explanation of a relevant concept with supporting factual references, e.g. like if we're looking at fascism, we could have a whole paragraph explaining the characteristics of fascism. That an explanation of that concept would be a fine paragraph, although I wouldn't recommend to do that one in our essays. We'll do that at the start of our essay. 6, we could have a number of significant relevant facts, explanations, or opinions, which, although are not connected, can be taken and assessed as a paragraph equivalent. And this one's really important for you guys to understand, that the examiner isn't trying to, I suppose, catch you guys out. So this number 6 in this type of paragraphs gives the examiner a very wide scope to actually I suppose, choose or interpret what a paragraph is within your essay. So although you might write your essay in different chunks of information, an examiner can look at your essay and feel like, oh, if this was paragraphed and structured differently, this student would receive more marks. And the examiner can actually change your paragraphs for you and mark them differently to what you write. So that's important to understand as well, that that's put in there to give the examiner wide scope and to, I suppose, help maximize students' marks as well. And then finally, a good concluding paragraph, which is not mere repetition. So in our concluding paragraph, we're going to have to draw or reach a conclusion, and that's really important to understand. Okay, the sweet spot. So 10 paragraph essay is where we're going to put all of our focus on for every Leaving Cert history essay that we write. And we're going to go through, I suppose, why we're looking to do that with this. So when we looked at our Leaving Cert essays, each essay that you're going to write is marked out of 100 marks. Your CM accounts for 60 marks and your OE accounts for 40 marks. So as every paragraph is marked out of 12 marks and the majority of students only receive 4 to 7 marks per paragraph, we're going to write 10 paragraphs including an introduction and a conclusion. When we do the maths behind that, we divide 60 by 10, which is our cumulative mark. That means we only have to pick up 6 marks per paragraph for a total of 50% of the marks that are on offer there per paragraph. So this is why it's really important when we're writing our essays, we're planning for essays to have 10 paragraphs and we're writing essays to have 10 paragraphs, because at the end of the day, it's a numbers game here. And if we're writing 10 paragraphs, it means that the content that needs to be included in each paragraph can be considerably, I suppose, less than if you only write 8 or 6 paragraphs where you need to be getting 9-10 marks per paragraph. And then obviously we know that they're very hard to come by. You have to provide analysis in every paragraph, which is extremely hard to do under the time pressure in the Leaving Cert exam. So this is why we're going to follow this sweet spot and write our 10 paragraph essays. So what does good historical paragraphs or writing look like? So before we get into things here, I just want to outline what I expect to see in a paragraph, and then we're going to give you an approach on how you can write a paragraph like that. So each paragraph in our Leaving Cert history essays should follow this structure or should include the following characteristics. Firstly, you need to react to the question. So you need to be recycling the words of the question into your answer at the start of every paragraph. So we react to the question in every paragraph. Next, we state the main point of your argument. So remember, we're trying to go above and beyond here. We're not just narrating and telling the story of these events. We're looking to provide analysis, and to do that, we need to state our argument. Next, we need to provide factual evidence. So we need, I know a lot of teachers won't like to put a number on this, but I understand my students just like to have the number, so I'm going to put it out there. I look for my students to put 6 to 8 historically correct references per paragraph. So that gives them a gauge on how long it should be, how many facts, and the phrase rather than a fact or a statistic I like is historically correct references, because I'm not just looking for facts per paragraph. Next, we need to explain the evidence. So we don't just state the narrative and tell the story, we explain what's going on. I'm going to show you how we do that as well. We show evidence of outside reading or watching. So if we remember, when we think back to our OE and what an excellent, what a student needed in their excellent, to receive an excellent in their OE, was they needed to show evidence of outside reading, or wide reading was the terms used in that. So we need to be thinking about how we can find out information that's not in the history book and how we can include that in each paragraph. And the last thing we need to do is link your argument back to the question. So I want to see you recycle the key words of the question into every single paragraph. So you're linking each episode event back to the title. We're trying to maximize the amount of OE marks that we're going to get. And we really want to emphasize to the examiner, we are answering the question that is being asked, because that was one of the key characteristics of the marking scheme. Okay, let's have a read through a paragraph, a sample paragraph from an essay. So the essay here, I know my pen doesn't work on this when I'm live on YouTube here, so I'm just going to use the cursor to guide you towards that. So in 2011, the question came up: to what extent did Lenin and or Stalin bring about social and economic change? So my paragraph 2 from that essay is going to be: how did Lenin's economic policy, war communism, bring about economic change? So that's the question students are going to try to ask for that paragraph. So let's have a read through that there, and let's try to, I suppose, just focus in on the structure that we're looking to include, and I suppose just the key characteristics of good historical writing. So historians have argued that Vladimir Lenin's economic policies have had profound impacts on the economic landscape of Russia in the early 1920s. War communism was introduced by Lenin with the overriding aim of winning the ongoing civil war taking place between the Red Army and the White Revolutionists. Although the passing of all large factories into the hands of the government was successful in mobilizing production towards the war effort, upon reflection it had detrimental effects on the economy of the country. Firstly, the nationalization of industry in Russia resulted in industrial production falling by 20%. Factories now had little incentive to produce more goods, as all profits were funneled through the government. Additionally, workers faced strict discipline to perform in work, which negatively affected their performance. Furthermore, workers could now buy very little with their wages as the price of goods rose out of control. This process is referred to as hyperinflation. Secondly, agricultural production fell from 80 million tonnes in 1913 to 38 million tonnes in 1931. Consequently, peasants refused to sell their grain as prices guaranteed by the government were too low. This led to widespread food shortages in the cities. This meant that the Cheka and the Red Army were sent into the countryside to seize grain and crush any opposition to this policy. As a result of the seizure of grain and bad weather, Russia experienced famines, in which it is estimated that 5 million died. Historian David Christian comments on the failures of Lenin's war communism by stating, "A government claiming to represent the people now found itself on the verge of being overthrown by that same working class." We can therefore see that although Lenin's economic policy of war communism contributed to a Red Army victory in the Civil War, it had damaging effects on the economy of Russia and resulted in extensive change on future economic policies. So we're recycling those words in our last sentence. We're really emphasizing to the examiner, I'm answering the question that you're asking me here. So let's have a look at this broke down. So we're going to look to identify the key characteristics of good historical writing here. So the first thing that we needed to do was react to the question. So historians have argued that Vladimir Lenin's economic policies have had profound impacts on the economic landscape of Russia in the early 1920s. So the question asked about economic change, I'm saying it had profound impacts. Second thing we needed to do was state our main argument. So my main argument here is that although this war communism was successful in mobilizing Lenin and his troops to winning the civil war, it had detrimental effects on the economy of the people, which had obviously negative impacts for the people of Russia. Next, we need to provide factual evidence. So we're looking for 6 to 8 historically correct references here. We can see multiple. I think I've got more, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 there. Yeah, so I've gone above and beyond there. 4, we need to explain the evidence. So look here, I'm not just listing statistics and facts. Furthermore, workers could now buy very little with their wages as the price of goods rose out of control. So I'm not just saying how these economic policies affected the economy. I'm explaining how that affected the people. So we see this process of hyperinflation come into place. 5, we're looking for evidence of outside reading or watching. Now, we don't need to have a quote from a historian in every single paragraph, but if we're demonstrating that this information is not just from the book, we're demonstrating wide reading. I don't just say reading now, I'll say wide reading, watching or listening. So books, documentaries, podcasts, and you can see the quote that I've included there. And then finally, we link our argument back to the question. We can therefore see, and then we're using those keywords from the question in our answer. We see extensive change is what I've said, because that was my argument, that it had profound change on the economic impact. Last thing I'm going to highlight to you guys, and it's really going to contribute towards you picking up good marks on your OE, is the use of linking words throughout our essay. So what you're going to see here is words like firstly, secondly, furthermore, additionally, consequently. These are the type of words that really support your development of good writing, and they're evident throughout my essay there. So I've highlighted them there for you. Although firstly, additionally, furthermore, secondly, consequently, as a result, we can therefore see that. These are what I'd call linking or connective words, when what they'll be referred to when you go on to college. And these are really important that we're using these in our paragraph, as they just support, I suppose, a good flow to our writing. I'm going to show you how we include those words with our structure, our P.E.E.L structure to our paragraphs. So P.E.E.L structured paragraphs is, I'll say, the formula that I get my students to use that helps support them with good historical writing. So in order to make sure that we're including the characteristics of good historical writing, we're going to follow a P.E.E.L approach to every single paragraph. So P.E.E.L stands for point, evidence, explain, and link. So we're going to look at different phrases and words that give us a formula to help us structure our paragraphs like so. So we have our 4 points to P.E.E.L, okay? Point, evidence, which is our link, which includes our linking words, explanation, and link. So let's focus on phrases that we can use for, I suppose, just successfully stating the main point of our argument. So firstly, we could say at the start of our paragraph, it can be argued that, historians have argued, the sources suggest, we can infer from the sources. These are phrases, and what I do with my students is I get them to print this page out and I get them to glue it into the front of their essay copy. So when students are writing essays, I expect them to look to their formula, how we structure our paragraphs, and I expect them to use phrases like this within that. So each paragraph would start, it can be argued that, historians have argued. That helps students state the main argument of their point. When giving evidence, your students are basically given 2 types of evidence to join ideas. So you could use phrases like firstly, secondly, in addition, furthermore, moreover, additionally. Or secondly, when students are giving evidence, it could be to change ideas. So we'll use phrases like however, conversely, on the other hand, alternatively, but. So these are really important phrases that we're using at the start of our sentences that helps really just, I suppose, improve the flow of our writing and helps us actually give evidence to back up the main point of our argument. After we give that evidence, we have to explain that evidence. It's not good enough just to merely state the narrative or tell the story. We need to explain and provide analysis as we go. That's what excellent paragraphs will receive. So phrases that we can use to explain is this means that, therefore, consequently, as a result. And these are really important that we include these after giving a set of evidence in each paragraph, or because, sorry. And then the final thing we have to do in each paragraph is link that paragraph back to the set question. And this is not the most important thing that we do, but when we're thinking about really maximizing our OE, our overall evaluation in our essays, we need to really overemphasize and almost just be concrete and telling the examiner, look what I'm doing, I'm answering the question that has been set and prescribed to me. So these link phrases are really important. We can therefore see, it is clear that the most important factor in conclusion, and I'm going to show you how I do that in every single paragraph in a model answer. Now we might not have time to go through every single paragraph from that model answer. We'll go through a couple, we'll break down a couple, and then you'll have that modeled answer will be sent out to you after completing the form at the end of the Saturday session. So now let's look at just how we plan our Leaving Cert essays. I'm just going to take a sip of water here, guys. So when we're planning our Leaving Cert History essays, I like to look at it from 2 different viewpoints. So this idea of macro planning or big picture. So how do we plan, like I suppose, zoomed out and looking at a big picture of what we need to include in the essay. And then micro planning, the finer details is what I'll call it. So we zoom in on each paragraph, what needs to be included within each paragraph for each history essay. So let's have a look at a question that came up just on last year's paper. What were the main characteristics of Italian fascism under Mussolini? So this is going to be, it's an essay question that is very popular, very typical for it to be asked in this fashion. It's a really nice essay question to answer, in my opinion. Main characteristics or the experience of life under Italian fascism, under Mussolini. So let's look at a macro essay plan for this. Now, when I'm doing this with my students, like this will be our first essay that we'll tackle together in class. I'll usually provide the students with this full essay plan. But as we get further in the year, especially if you're in 6th year now, we shouldn't be relying on our teachers to give us essay plans. We should be thinking about how we can write plans ourselves. So when I'm looking to complete an essay, the first thing I'll do is complete this macro plan. So obviously, first of all, I'm going to write my intro. If we follow our sweet spot, so the 10 paragraph essay that's going to maximize our marks, that means we're going to need to have 8 paragraphs that include the main arguments of our point. And then obviously we have an intro and conclusion at each end of that. So firstly, we're going to have an intro. So for this one, the main characteristics of Italian fascism under Mussolini. My first paragraph, I'm going to discuss the March on Rome. Paragraph number 2, I'm going to discuss the 1924 election. Let's just make note of the types of events or phases or episodes that I'm discussing per paragraph. They're separate events, separate stages in Mussolini's ride to power. So I'm dealing with one event in history per paragraph. That's really important to understand. Paragraph 3, I'm going to look at propaganda, the control of media. So that's one idea. I'm not just discussing propaganda as a whole. I'm discussing Mussolini's control of the media in propaganda. Paragraph 4, I'm discussing propaganda again. This time I'm looking at how he developed this cult of personality. So once again, really important to understand the types of paragraphs that we should be writing and how we deal with one episode, one stage, one sequence, or one stage in a sequence of events per paragraph. Paragraph 5, I'm looking at terror under Mussolini. Paragraph 6, I'm looking at his idea of corporatism, or the corporate state might be more familiar with. Paragraph 7, we're looking at the indoctrination of the youth. Paragraph 8, we're looking at economic policies. Once again, I'm going to highlight here, I'm not just dealing broadly with Mussolini's economic policies. I'm dealing with one very specific area of that, agriculture. So I'm dealing with his battle for grain. While you could still look at other economic policies, so his battle for the lira or currency, or what was the other one, battle for births, you could look at as well. I'm just going to deal with agriculture and his battle for grain. So I'm not rushing to get too much information in. Once I plan my macro essay plan, I know I'm hitting all my points here and I'm dealing with specific events, episodes in a general or a bigger sequence of events in history. And then finally, we're going to look at our conclusion as well. Okay, let's look at our micro essay plan. So this is going to be a lot of detail here, and to be honest, this takes time when we're planning this, but once we do one plan, that's that done, and it really helps us gain a very deep knowledge of what needs to be talked about in each essay. So for our intro here, we could look at this from multiple different viewpoints. So we could outline the origins of Mussolini's fascist party in Italy, so describe his opinion on the coalition governments that ruled Italy post-World War I, outline what Mussolini promised to do if he became leader of Italy, described his uniform followers or the black shirts, outline how these factors would influence the characteristics of Italian fascism under Mussolini. Now, I would have done, when I was writing this essay, I would have done my macro plan, my micro plan, and then actually went and, I suppose, write the essay. And when I was actually writing the essay, I realised I had too much information in the intro, so just even touching upon those points is fine for that. So the March on Rome, firstly, you'll see I set out myself like 5 to 6 different things to do per essay, and if I can do all that, I know I'm getting my historically correct references in there, and if I'm following my P.E.E.L approach, I'm, I suppose, just giving myself the best chance of maximising those marks. So for the March on Rome, I have to outline the result of the 1921 general election for the Fascist Party, describe increased political violence between 1919 and 1922, specifically highlighting the role of the black shirts in this violence, explain the black shirts' role in breaking up the 1922 general election and the impact that had on Mussolini, Detail Victor Emmanuel's response to Luigi Facta's orders to call a state of emergency in response to Mussolini's actions. Explain how Mussolini became Prime Minister. Number 6, always link back to how these events would symbolise Mussolini's use of terror in Italy. So we're going to look at this, zone in on this paragraph specifically later on, so I won't go through every paragraph. But what's important you're understanding, look at the amount of detail I'm giving myself in my micro plan. So when we defined what micro planning was, we're dealing with finer details. So you can see that I've included huge amounts of detail per paragraph. And once we have our micro plan done, the essay essentially writes itself. It becomes extremely easy. So let's look at the 1924 election. I'll skip past this one. We look at propaganda, the control of media. So we'll look at how I've broken that down. So I've given 7 different things, but I actually haven't talked about the cinema campaign, so we can kind of get rid of that one there. So firstly, we had to outline what happened to all independent media in 1925. Secondly, explain the role of the Italian police in ensuring media broadcasted Mussolini appropriated content or propaganda content. Describe the Corriere della Sera's transformation from an opposition newspaper to a state-run outlet. Describe what editors of newspapers were expected to do from now on. Explain the role of carefully selected pictures or posters of Mussolini in Italian society. Include a quote from Henri Beret. So I love this quote. I get all my students to include it. He was a French journalist who visited Italy, I think it was in 1933, and he came back to France and wrote in his newspaper column about this. Mussolini is omnipresent. He is like a god. He observes you from every angle and you see him in every spot. So I think that quote really just summarises his influential role in controlling the propaganda there. So I'm going to flick through the other paragraphs really quickly because I want to get everything done today. But you'll see the amount of detail that I've included in each paragraph. And you can see if I just go back, there's some paragraphs that have more information than others. That's fine, because we all have our own interests as well. And if we have an interest in a particular phase of history, I do encourage students to focus in on that and really try and maximize your marks there. So like in our conclusion, maybe I'll go through that really quickly, but I'll show you how I write a conclusion. We restate the main ideas of our essay. When one considers it is clear that we answer the so what question. So we need to explain why any of this matters, why the reader or the examiner should care about what they've just read. And then the last thing we need to do is include a kicker or a lingering thought. So the last sentence should leave the reader nodding in agreement and feeling glad that they bothered to read your essay. So you could, I suppose, if you're stuck for this, include a famous quote that connects your ideas in the previous sentences. I'm going to show you an example of a kicker when we look at my conclusion. Okay, so let's focus in on our propaganda, the control of the media, and let's read a sample or modelled paragraph from that. So propaganda, once again, I've already went through that, so I won't go through it. So what I've done here, I was going to get the visualizer out and physically write that for you guys and go through my thought process as I write that, but it would have just took too much time, so I videoed myself and just sped it up here. So when I'm writing my paragraphs, what I do is I have my micro plan up here, right beside me as I write it, and then I have my P.E.E.L structure here. So what this does is help me structure my paragraph in a way that I'm hitting all 4 points: point, evidence, explanation, and link. And when I have my plan there, I'm making sure I'm including all my historically correct references. So as I go through writing my essay, I'm using the phrases from my P.E.E.L paragraph. Firstly, you can see my connecting statements there to introduce evidence. Maybe we won't watch through all of this, or we'll keep going. It's quite sped up actually. So we'll really quickly, once again, I'm just going to my P.E.E.L paragraph approach. I'm taking phrases there that is going to help structure my paragraph in a way that allows me to maximize the marks and ensuring that I'm including all those key characteristics of good historical writing. And I'm making sure that I'm going to my plan, my micro plan, where we're looking at the finer details, and I'm checking all boxes. I'm answering all the questions that I've outlined for myself. And this is a great one. Writing those micro plans is a really amazing way to study. Academic studies suggest that, I suppose, just taking an active part in learning and questioning yourself is really an integral part of how to study successfully. So writing these plans is actually essentially you studying as well. So what you can see here is that I'm explaining evidence. So I'll read out that sentence there for us. Police commissioners were placed at all other media outlets, ensuring that all content produced broadcasted state propaganda. Now I'm going to explain that evidence. An example of this is the Corriere della Sera newspaper, which was once an opposition newspaper that was transformed into a fascist dominated news outlet, I think it's called, or something, that sold 4 million copies a day in Italy. So we see how important that is. But you can see I've introduced evidence, I've explained that. Now I'm using my connective or linking words. Additionally, editors were expected to praise Mussolini's successes and ignore his failures, or something along that. And then you'll see me explain or show evidence of outside reading here. The phrase Mussolini is always right became common in newspapers. So I'm just going through my thought process, what I'm doing when I'm writing paragraphs, how I'm writing the paragraphs, how I'm structuring them, how I'm using my micro plans and my P.E.E.L paragraph approach to write those paragraphs. So it's really important to spend, it probably takes about 40 minutes to write a micro plan, I'm not going to lie to you, but once that micro plan is done, the essay writes itself. So we'll keep going. I know this is sped up. We'll look at my linking sentence towards the end, and we're going to break down this specific paragraph in more detail on the next slide. So here you can see I'm including more evidence of outside reading. French journalist Henri Beret visited Italy during Mussolini's reign and described the impact of his control over the media. Mussolini is omnipresent. He is like a god. He views you from every angle and observes you everywhere, I think the quote goes. Perfect. Last thing I'm going to do is link that paragraph back. We can therefore see that. And what's important, I'll maybe highlight to you guys here, every single paragraph I write won't be that length, because that's just not feasible for me to write within 5 minutes. So usually I'll be aiming for half a page to 3/4 of a page per paragraph. You can see that's about 3/4 of a page. And that's an area of history that I just like. So I'm able to write more about that. I know more about that information. So I'm going to write more for that. And I always highlight that to my students, is every paragraph doesn't have to be the same length. If you like something more, if you particularly know more about a specific event, let's include more information on that. So that's going to be one of my longer paragraphs in that essay. But to be honest, I'd say that's going to get around 9 to 10 on a CM. See, that wouldn't even get a 12. I don't think that's providing breathtaking analysis to an examiner. And that's what you need to be doing to get a 12. So that's going to get about a 9 or a 10. I'd imagine 11 if the examiner's feeling generous. So let's have a look at this paragraph in particular. So I'm just going to read it out, guys. So the historical sources suggest that propaganda in the media was a key characteristic of life under Italian fascism. Know how I'm using that key word from the question in the first sentence when I'm stating my point. Mussolini used the media as an integral propaganda machine to gain total control over the lives of the people of Italy. Firstly, connective word, introducing evidence. When Mussolini took control of Italy after the failed assassination attempt on his life by Irish aristocrat Violet Gibson, all independent newspapers were closed. Furthermore, police commissioners were placed at all other media outlets, ensuring that all content produced broadcasted state propaganda. An example of this is the Corriere della Sera newspaper, once an opposition newspaper, transformed into a fascist-dominated outlet that sold 4 million copies a day. Additionally, so I'm adding more evidence, editors were expected to praise Mussolini's successes and not report any failures. Once again, I'll just know how short and sweet my sentences are. They're not 3 or 4 lines per sentence. There isn't much commas included. I like to keep my sentences short and sweet, to the point. Really makes them nice to read. It's an easy read. That's going to contribute towards your overall expression. So the slogan "Mussolini is always right" became common on printed press. Furthermore, connective word, Mussolini's propaganda machine placed carefully selected pictures and posters of him across the country in an attempt to humanise El Duce. French journalist Henri Beret visited Italy over Mussolini's reign and described the impact of his control over the media. Mussolini is omnipresent. He is like a god. He sees you from every angle. We can therefore see that propaganda was a key characteristic of Italian fascism under Mussolini. Now that sentence, I'm not going to say it's the most important, but if we're looking to get a H1, you're not going to get that without our linking sentences, recycling those key words and phrases into our paragraphs. Okay, let's look at how this essay or this paragraph contains those key characteristics of good historical writing. So the first thing that I've done is I've reacted to the question. The sources suggest that propaganda in the media was a key characteristic of life under Italian fascism. Recycling those words, and it sounds so silly to say that what I'm trying to do there, and what I'm doing openly, is showing to the examiner, look what I'm doing. I'm answering the question that's been asked. I'm using the keywords from the question in my answer. Second thing I need to do is state my main argument. So my main argument was that Mussolini used the media as an integral part of his overall propaganda machine to gain total control over the lives of the people of Italy. Next thing we need to do is provide factual evidence, or what I like to call historically correct references. So we need about 6 to 8, so 2, 4, 6, 7 in there. That's absolutely perfect. Next thing we need to do is explain that evidence. So you can see here what I've done. Mussolini's propaganda machine placed carefully selected pictures of or posters of him across the country in order to humanize El Duce. So he wanted to, Mussolini wanted to portray this image of his humbleness, and that he was just like the Italian people, and that he was this perfect statesman who would work tirelessly for his country. So he used this kind of picture propaganda campaign in order to do that. That's an explanation of the evidence. Fifth thing we need to do is provide evidence of outside reading, watching or listening. So I have my quote, Mussolini is omnipresent. He is like a god. He sees you from every angle. Last thing we need to do is link our argument back to the question. We can therefore see that propaganda was a key characteristic of Italian fascism under Mussolini. Okay, let's really quickly look at our introduction here and how I'd write an introduction for this. So if we link back to our types of paragraphs, we could, in our introduction, there was essentially 3 types of introductions that we could do. We could explain key terms, describe the historiography, or provide or state, I suppose, the structure of your essay. So I've decided to state the structure of my essay here. So the Italians, what I've done here first is include a quote from a historian, just to kind of grab the attention. Already what I'm trying to do is show the examiner, look what I'm doing. I'm showing out evidence of outside reading. The Italians had been divided before, but by November 1919, they were more divided than ever. Historian Martin Clark. This essay will consolidate Clark's argument that the introduction of fascism into Italian society causes division never seen before in their history. Under Mussolini, the experience of life changed profoundly for Italians. This essay will discuss how the characteristics of life changed under his rule by discussing how terror and propaganda became a normal part of daily life. Secondly, how his policies of corporatism and indoctrination characterized the experience of life for large parts of the population. Finally, by outlining how Mussolini's economic policies divided the social classes of Italy even further and became defining episodes in the characteristics of Italian fascism under Mussolini. Now that introduction is providing analysis there. You can see how I'm talking about economic policies dividing social classes, and what I'm just trying to do is highlight to our examiner, I'm looking for a H1 here. Once again, you notice how short my introduction is, though. There's nothing to that. That would probably only get 6 or 7 marks, I'd imagine. Maybe that could be 5, because I'm not really giving any historically correct references there. But that's okay, because we're following that sweet spot paragraph approach where we're writing 10 paragraphs, and if we're getting 5 for our introduction, but we might pick up 7 or 8 in one of our good paragraphs where we know loads of information about, that's absolutely fine, because on average we need to receive 6 marks per paragraph. I hope that's making sense, and I suppose just the maths behind that and the why we're writing 10 paragraphs is very clear. So let's have a look at paragraph 1, okay, the March on Rome. What's important here is that we're dealing with just this episode. I'm not talking about anything else. I'm not bringing any emphasis in. And what's important here is that I'm not just narrating this event in history. I'm linking it back to the question that's being asked, which was characteristics of life. So let's look how I do that. The March on Rome is a significant moment in Mussolini's rise to power in Italy. However, it also gave Italian society an insight into the characteristics of Italian fascism that were to dominate everyday life. The Fascist Party won 35 seats in the 1925 election, which meant Mussolini was elected to Parliament. Short sentences, nice and sweet. During this period, 1919 to 1922, historians have identified increased political violence in which Mussolini's black shirts played an influential role. Firstly, the black shirts helped to break up a general strike called by the Social Party. So there's evidence. Firstly, connective statement. Now I'm going to explain that evidence. This led to more and more Italians seeing Mussolini as the man who could save Italy from the communist menace and industrial unrest. These series of events gave Mussolini the confidence to act as he demanded that he be appointed Prime Minister. Mussolini announced the Fascist Party's intentions to march on Rome as his black shirts followers began to occupy towns throughout north and central Italy. And here I've included evidence of outside reading. Either the government will be given to us or we shall seize it by marching on Rome. So a quote from Mussolini. On the 28th of October, Prime Minister Luigi Facta pleaded to King Emmanuel III to declare a state of emergency and use the army to stop Mussolini. King Emmanuel feared the outbreak of a civil war and refused to use the army against the Fascist Party. Consequently, so connective words, however I'm changing ideas, Facta resigned from his role and Mussolini was appointed Prime Minister. Mussolini's supporters then staged a victory march through the streets of Rome, symbolising their coup. Now what I'm going to do is link that back to the question what's really important. Through the March on Rome, we can see how terror would become an everyday characteristic of life under Mussolini and his black shirts. That's important that we've highlighted that there. So paragraph 2, we're at 11:52 here. Sorry guys, I'm just deciding what I should actually do here. We'll read through this. So let's look at another paragraph here. I'm dealing with a specific event in that. So what you're looking for here is, once again, just that P.E.E.L structure to our paragraph. We're looking for evidence of outside reading. We're looking for historically correct references. Most importantly, we're looking to recycle the keywords in the essay, in the paragraph. So the 1924 election was an important event in Mussolini's seizure of power that would also give historians an insight into the characteristics of life. So although this was, I suppose, an event in his rise to power, I'm using this and I'm phrasing it in a way that's going to give us an insight into what life would be like under Mussolini. After being appointed Prime Minister, Mussolini served as Minister for Foreign Affairs and for the Interior. This was significant as it gave Mussolini control of the police. Consequently, so changing ideas, Mussolini will use his power in these positions to gradually set up a one-party state. Firstly, connective word, Mussolini transformed the black shirts into a government-paid militia called the Volunteer Militia for National Security. This was an important decision as now the organisation would be paid by the state, and this would give Mussolini a free hand to attack political enemies. So I'm thinking back, so in my introduction I talked about how Mussolini was going, I provided a structure that I'm going to talk about how Mussolini used terror and how that defined the characteristics of life. So I'm linking back this 1924 election to terror and how that became a characteristic of life. I'm not just detailing or telling the story about this election. So where was I? As a result, the new Volunteer Militia for National Security would play a significant role in electoral violence and the rigging of elections to ensure a Mussolini victory. Additionally, many political opponents were prevented from voting by the Volunteer Militia. Consequently, the Fascist Party won 65% of the votes cast in the election, and thanks to the newly introduced Acerbo law, Mussolini had control of the parliament. It is therefore clear that the 1924 election symbolises the terror that would become a characteristic of life in Italy. So once again, it's really important how that P.E.E.L paragraph approach helps us to structure our paragraphs in this way, that we're not just several significant issues that show that the characteristics of life under Italian fascism were seriously affected by propaganda, terror, corporatism, and Mussolini's economic policies. Firstly, this essay has outlined how in Mussolini's rise to power, the world saw a glimpse into how terror would become a key characteristic of life under Mussolini's rule through the March on Rome and the 1924 election. Secondly, a discussion was put forward how Mussolini used propaganda in the media and around his cult of personality to impact the lives of Italians. Thirdly, this essay discussed how terror became an everyday characteristic of life, that word, under Mussolini's rule through the OVRA and the special political crimes courts established in the country. Furthermore, the policies of corporatism and indoctrination severely impacted the characteristics of life for Italians. Finally, how Mussolini's economic policies had opposite effects for the upper and lower classes of Italian society. And I could have added another sentence there, that caused further division among social classes in Italian society. Now I'm going to try and include that kicker. While there has been a large body of work created around the characteristics of life under Italian fascism in the period 1919 to 1945, further analysis is required to fully understand the complexities of the impact on different parts of Italian society. So I'm trying to leave that lingering thought with the examiner that although this is really important, it still requires for further study, further investigation, so we can understand the complexities of the impact of this period of time. So that is everything that we're going to cover today, guys. I'm just going to highlight to you once again that there's a discount code that you can use from this Saturday session, which is essay writing, and that'll get you 20% discount off standard and premium plans on ExamRevision's website, and it expires tomorrow night at